So you might have heard of a country having a parliament or a prime minister accompanied by either a president or a monarch. Those countries have what's known as a parliamentary government. And I'm here to tell you that most parliamentary government systems are fat and stupid. Now, why do I say most? Because there are actually two types of parliamentary government, and one of those types, a semi-presidential republic, is not that bad. It's very similar to the government we have here in the US, where a popularly elected president is the head of state, and that's the person who signs laws into effect, controls the military, and makes all the major diplomatic decisions. These types of governments also have a legislative body elected every couple of years who proposes laws and represents the interests of individual districts across the country. Again, similar to how our Congress works in the US, except they also sometimes have snap elections to elect a new legislature earlier than usual, as we saw with France recently, and they usually have a prime minister appointed by the president, whose job is usually just to make sure everybody in the legislative body behaves themselves. The other type of parliamentary government, a pure parliamentary system, is significantly more problematic, but for whatever reason is a lot more popular in the world. In a pure parliamentary system, members of parliament, or MPs, are elected to represent districts in the country for a term lasting a certain amount of years. Like in semi-presidential systems, a term can last less than usual if a snap election is called. The difference is in the roles of the prime minister and president, and how the prime minister is chosen. In a pure parliamentary system, even though the president is still popularly elected, they essentially just serve as a figurehead. Some of these countries will have a monarch instead of a president if it's a constitutional monarchy, but their role is still basically the same. Even though they are formally the head of state and commander-in-chief of the military and the person who goes to diplomatic events, all the real power is concentrated in the hands of the prime minister. That's the person who makes all the laws, controls the military, and ultimately leads the country. And unlike a semi-presidential republic, they are not appointed by the head of state, but rather by the party that has the most seats in parliament. The main issue with that is that nobody in parliament has term limits, so if somebody's appointed to be the prime minister, they can be in that position for as long as they want, whether it's 5 years or fucking 60, and constitutionally, it's a-okay as long as their party maintains the parliament majority. And some politicians tend to get cocky when they're allowed to be in their seat for an unrestricted period of time. Take the guy up north, for example. I mean, he legalized weed, which is cool and all, but aside from that, the dude is a complete condescending hack. Everybody has long been seeing past his whole Mr. Nice Guy persona. He's been displaying some pretty openly authoritarian tendencies with how he disarmed his population twice, and on top of that, he's kind of a pussy. I mean, the trucker protests were pretty fucking stupid, but fleeing the Capitol because of a couple angry rednecks? Come on, dude. Pretty much everyone agrees that the man has got to go, but of course, it's super difficult to actually make that happen because the Liberal Party of Canada has held the majority in Parliament for nearly the last decade and probably won't get pushed out anytime soon. The fact that the guy hasn't been booted out of power after these pictures surfaced on the internet tells you everything you need to know. Or let's try a more severe example. Some of you may have heard of the Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban, authoritarian piece of shit, looks like a toad, in bed with the Russian government, and he's been in his position since 2010, and also between 1998 and 2002. And of course, since there's no term limits and there's a ton of propaganda in the country to make people vote for his party, he can stay in his position for as long as he wants and nobody can do anything about it. And you know who else has been in power since 2010? Mark Rutte, the Prime Minister of the Netherlands. Now, to be fair, this guy is an authoritarian and he actually wants to step down, so the Dutch government is currently looking for somebody to replace him with. But this is where another problem with parliamentary governments comes in, because their elections were 7 months ago and they still haven't found a replacement. Honestly, given how much power the prime minister holds in this kind of system, why the hell are they not directly elected? So people are just supposed to vote for representatives and hope those guys choose somebody who is best fit to control the country? Because right now in the Dutch government, there's this whole complicated situation where there's this Shrek villain looking ass who's also a racist piece of shit who wants to step in his place, and the Dutch parliament wants to prevent that, so they're currently fighting to find somebody else to appoint. And it's just this huge shit show that will go on for God knows how long. The British Parliament also has this issue sometimes. Like, remember when Boris Johnson resigned and then Liz Truss was appointed and she lasted less than a head of lettuce, so her spot was filled in by some random career politician who sucks at managing the economy? Like, say what you want about the Electoral College, but it's still a more straightforward way of electing somebody than whatever the hell that is. I'd also like to mention Germany here, because while Merkel was not authoritarian, if there had been term limits to make her leave office earlier, she could have been replaced by somebody who would have had a harder stance on Russia a lot earlier. So as you can see, some parliaments have authoritarian prime ministers, some parliaments suck at appointing prime ministers, and there's one parliament in particular that is both of those things. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I ask you to behave yourselves in the comments because we're going to be talking about that country. Regardless of your opinion on Israel or Zionism, Benjamin Netanyahu has ruined Israel's reputation more than any prime minister before him. Now, I can understand Israel responding to the Hamas attack that happened in October, but this guy responded in the stupidest, most reckless way possible. He straight up decided to screw international relations, screw human rights, screw reasonable force, and just make this whole thing as long and painful as possible just so that he can keep himself in power for a little longer, which is something he's cared about for a pretty fucking long time. He first served as prime minister between 1996 and 1999, then between 2009 and 2021, then he was briefly ousted before returning to his seat at the end of 2022. He has served as prime minister for 16 years, longer than any other Israeli PM in history. Again, nobody should be in power for 16 years. There should be term limits to stop this type of shit. And he clearly wants to hold on to his position because despite being ousted in 2021, he still managed to claw his way back into power. And he was able to do that because the parliament sucks at finding a replacement for him. I don't even know what's going on in their parliament at this point, but from what I can tell, it's a lot of arguing and gridlocks and essentially zero progress with finding a new prime minister that will resolve the conflict without making a complete ass out of themselves. I mean, guys, it's already a huge problem that senators here in the US don't have term limits because now our government is filled with old geezers who have been in office for the last 40 years and are completely out of touch with the modern world. But at least the person in charge is swapped out frequently, and the old geezers aren't in charge of the selection process for them. A parliamentary government does not keep those things in check, which is why it is a terrible system that leads to terrible things, and countries need to start ditching them for governments where the person in charge is popularly elected and is replaced frequently, because as the saying goes, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that's the end of this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, this was your captain speaking, and I'll see you later.